Lennon must have felt when he said, "There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen." Well, it doesn't just feel like one of those weeks where decades happens. It feels like there have been a number of weeks and months and even years now where we've had so much information flooding through the media channels at us that it's difficult to keep up with. It certainly feels like decades are happening each and every week. And just this week, I'm looking at stories like this one from Activist Post, Freedom Act Passes, Effectively Kills Freedom by Brandon Turbeville. We have hacked emails expose George Soros as Ukraine puppet master. Again, no surprise there, but still interesting to get those details from the hacked emails. For people who are following the MH17 story, there's some interesting developments where the group, the Bellingcat group that claimed to debunk the Russian photos of the flight MH17 crash zone, have themselves been debunked. So that's an interesting little story there for people who are keeping track with it. But I want to concentrate today on a story that's probably not going to get as much attention in the alt media, but maybe it should. It, I think, is going to affect people's lives fundamentally in the coming decades, not necessarily in and of itself for this one particular story, but what it says about the way our world is developing. I'm talking about this story from the very format light Global Times, globaltimes.cn. And for people who don't know, the Global Times is an adjunct of the People's Daily, which is a state-run Chinese media outlet. As all of the major media outlets in China are. They're all various, basically, mouthpieces for the Chinese government, but the Global Times is kind of on a long leash. It tends to court controversy a little bit more with some of its commentary. So this is coming from the Communist Party, but it's kind of where they put out trial balloons of various ideas and see how far they get. So the party doesn't claim direct responsibility for what's written in here, but it is obviously coming from the Chinese government. So it's official. It's an official newspaper, and here we have this interesting article that doesn't seem like it would be interesting, but it's about the yuan inclusion in the SDR basket. And again, for people who have been following my media, you'll know that this is to do with the IMF special drawing rights, which is a type of currency that's only held by central banks and is redeemable in one of four currencies right now. It's the pound, it's the dollar, it's the euro, and the yen. But every 5 years, they try to take a look at that basket. They see if it's weighted correctly, and they see if there are any other currencies that should be put in, or if there are any that should be taken out. And it looks increasingly like the yuan, the Chinese currency, is going to be added to this basket this year. And I think this is a significant development. We'll get into a little bit more about that in a moment, but I just want to take a look at this particular story. So basically, it leads with the idea that the IMF is more or less, it's inevitable at this point that the yuan is going to be included. And I concur. I think it's probably almost certain it's going to happen this year. If not this year, then in the next currency basket evaluation 5 years from now. But it gets really interesting as we get into this article, where it starts talking about how merely joining the SDR basket is not the only important step for the yuan, even if it's already a significant development in the currency's internationalization. Actually, the inclusion of the SDR basket is not just a question of if or when, but a question of how much. And it talks about the fact that this is a weighted basket. Not all the currencies in here are weighted equally. So that, for example, it's when it was first launched in 1981, we had the basket 42%, 19%, 13%, 13%, 13% for the dollar, Deutschmark, French franc, yen, and pound. Well, obviously, the Deutschmark and French franc are no more, so that's been replaced by the euro, and the weighting has changed a little bit, but still, the dollar is predominant. And then you have the euro, the yen, and the pound with a lesser share of that basket. So NSDR means different things in different currencies. It converts to a different amount in different currencies, depending which currency you want to convert it to. And they make this interesting distinction here in this editorial where they talk about the Deutsche Mark French franc block versus the dollar pound yen block, which was what the five currencies that were originally in the SDR back in 1981. That's interesting. They start going into how Germany and France are not the same, as one is a Germanic culture and the other is a French or half Latin culture. Nevertheless, these countries had no choice but to work together to establish and expand the European Union. So they were kind of a bloc within this SDR. And then the other bloc was the Anglo-Saxon UK-US dollar-pound bloc, which includes Japan and the yen, because Of course, Japan is basically just an adjunct of the US ever since the post-World War II occupation and rebuilding. So they put it in those terms, and they start to say, well, okay, so in that case, the original combined share of the mark and franc was 32%. So this German-French alliance bloc within the SDR was only 32%, and then the rest of that was this dollar-pound-yen bloc. Well, that's been reweighted, and with the euro, so now we have the euro is 37.4% of the basket, which means that 62.6% is the dollar-pound-yen part of the basket. And they're starting to say, well, what if the Chinese yuan gets included? What if, for example, if we assume a 10% for the yuan in the SDR basket, then the euro plus the yuan will make up 47.4% of the basket. So what they are actually saying here is that if they're put in the SDR, they're more likely to be part of the bloc with Germany and France, i.e. with the euro, than they are obviously with the Anglo-American alliance and Japan, who of course are their admitted enemies. So it's very interesting the way they're trying to propose this, almost as if they're siding with the European Union in a way in the Eurozone and kind of identifying it, at least within the framework of this special drawing rights. And I find that fascinating because at the very least, they start talking about the increasing closeness of Europe and China in such things as the Chinese-initiated Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Wouldn't it be an interesting development if the Eurozone continues to go up in flames as it has been for years, and we're watching its slow motion collapse at the moment in Greece, where billions of euros are bleeding out of the Greek banking system and they're reaching crisis point. They've really passed the crisis point by this point, and the Eurozone is still lingering in just they can't even inflate the currency when they try with this ridiculous QE that they're doing now. It's a basket case. What would happen if China stepped in and decided to back up the Eurozone or to form some sort of European currency bloc or some sort of trade to back up the euro? That would be interesting. And of course, everyone's talking about China's gold reserves. They say 1,000 tons. We know it's more than that. Whether it's several thousand, whether it's 10,000, 20,000, I've heard 30,000 tons they actually have. If they suddenly came out and tried to backstop Europe with their gold holdings, I don't know. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that would be an interesting development. And what would that mean for the future of the economic model? Because let's put it in perspective. Ultimately, this is where it's heading. It's going to head towards some sort of global currency, global monetary system. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be one piece of paper or whatever that everyone holds in their hands that's the same in every country. It could be done behind the scenes, like the IMF special drawing rights. And that's just an interesting development, the way that China now seems to be at least floating the idea, hey, maybe we're part of a currency bloc with the euro. Very, very interesting development. I have a lot more to say about this, but I think I'm going to have to develop this in a future International Forecaster editorial. Not this weekend, because I'm already going to write the answer to last weekend's editorial this weekend, but maybe next weekend. We're definitely going to have to cover this subject, as I think this SDR idea is going to be more and more important. In the meantime, if you're interested, of course, you can look at some of the just the basic outlines of what the SDR is and try to parse the tea leaves to see what's coming in the globalized currency order that they're trying to create right now. Some fascinating things happening, and sometimes there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen.